we could talk about a recent Russian state TV segment on the speakership race. I don't know if you guys saw this, but Russian state TV has been watching the speakership race in the United States with great anticipation. And the reason why they've been watching it with great anticipation is they believe that if they get an anti-Ukraine aid House Speaker in the position of Speaker, then they'll be able to undercut aid to Ukraine, then they'll be able to outlast the Ukrainians, and then they'll be able to win their war and conquest of Ukraine. And so they've been watching it with much anticipation. And the announcement that Mike Johnson, the ultra-conservative House Speaker, Mr. The gays shall end democracy, the gays shall bring sexual chaos, currently signed on to 3 national abortion bans, Mike Johnson. They saw he was elected and they seem to be quite excited about it. And I'm going to show you guys some votes he's had afterwards to give context to why they might be excited. But I wanted to first show you guys this new segment. Double Boy, thanks for the tier 1 sub. I appreciate it. Zelensky is in mourning today. Mike Johnson was elected House Speaker. All 220 Republicans voted for him. Johnson is not only the ultra-right Trump supporter, and always when Russian state TV calls you ultra-right, just saying their standards are a little out there, and if they're calling you ultra-right, just saying, continuing. Who always voted against aid to Ukraine and making corresponding statements that were considered to be anti-Ukrainian. Now, this is not true. In 2022, he did vote in favor of the Land Lease Act. He later voted against renewing it, and he later voted against basically every other Ukrainian aid package. One second. Here is his voting record. He voted in favor of the Ukraine Democracy Defense Lend-Lease Act of 2022, which allowed the lend-lease of American defense materials to Ukraine, but everything after that is garbage. He voted against the 2022 Ukraine Supplemental Appropriation. He voted in favor of Amendment 21 to HR 2670, the National Defense Authorization Act, which would have stricken $300 million of assistance for Ukraine. He voted in favor of Amendment 22 HR 2670, the National Defense Authorization Act, which would have prohibited all security assistance for Ukraine. So that means he voted in favor of banning aid entirely. He voted in favor of Amendment 25 to HR 2670, the National Defense Authorization Act, which would have removed the extension of Lend-Lease authority to Ukraine. And he voted against HR 5692, Ukraine's Security Assistance Oversight Supplemental Appropriation Act, and has made anti-Ukraine aid statements. Now, I want to give you guys a more total view of Mike Johnson's record and things he said about the war before he became Speaker and statements he's made after he became Speaker. But first, let's finish this segment and show you what the Russians think of him. Where Ukraine is concerned, it's sufficient to look at Johnson's ratings. With respect to his support of Ukraine, his rating is very poor. This means that all of this will suit us well. If the new speaker did not swear or make promises to his pro-Ukrainian fellow party members, the budget of aid to Ukraine is in question. With a Trump fanatic as a speaker, the bill for $106 billion proposed by Biden definitely will not pass. Just put a pin in that. I don't know for sure if it will or will not pass, but I just want you guys to put a pin in that. Because saying that confidently does not necessarily match up with the multitude of evidence we can look at outside of his voting record, which is concerning. Johnson will simply not put it up for a vote. Outward attention of the U.S. will be focused on helping a Jewish nation. Is this a trap remix of his election? Is this a fan cam? I look like a fan cam. What was the reason for this? The question by an ABC reporter, Rachel Scott. Mr. Johnson, you helped lead the efforts to overturn the 2020 election results. Do you stand by that vote? By the way, what a wild response from a senior Republican. Just a reporter's like, hey, remember that time you tried to kind of like make it so the guy who won the election didn't win the election? And you were organizing the effort on behalf of Trump as he was, you know, writing up executive orders to seize voting machines. Do you think that, no, shut up, shut up, shut up? Yeah, that's not concerning at all. Third in line to the presidency. The next question about aid with Ukraine was also met with ridicule. Will you support additional aid to Ukraine? You already asked your question. Go away. I hate this woman. God, she's annoying. The congresswoman who yelled at the reporter is Virginia Fox from Carolina. Some had a negative reaction to her behavior. Okay. Anyway, most had a negative reaction from her behavior. So, Russian state TV, its job is to show, definitely because this is domestic and not international, its job is to prove to the Russian public that the war is worth fighting, that it can be won, and that it's worth the cost. And that the West is weak, and that if we just, you know, stiff it out and keep dumping more men into it, eventually victory shall prevail. Mighty Rus shall redominate the Russian world, which Ukraine was wrongfully stolen from. That is the narrative that they're trying to push. And so that means that certain statements that Mike Johnson has made has been left out. Now, look, I was the first one to come out, I think, at the Twitch political streaming space, and really go after Johnson on his voting record on Ukraine when he became House Speaker, right? I think his voting record is definitely, at the very least, a warning, because it shows that he, on a personal level, is not that committed. Now, he might believe that there is some interest at play, but he will go with the whims and the flow as a singular congressman of the Republican base. If he's in support of Ukraine aid, then he's willing to oppose it if the whims of the base tell him to fly this way and go that way, he'll go with the wind. If he's against Ukraine aid, well, then he's against Ukraine aid. Either way, he voted against it, and I don't think there's a good justification for it. But I do want to show you guys that his statements on this were not all just rah, stop the aid. Here is an example of him. I think this is from this is right after the invasion. Now, this is at the start of it, and this is when he voted for the Lend-Lease Act, showing that he at least believes that there was some interest at the start of the invasion in us supporting Ukraine.
There are a number of measures that we could take if we could reach bipartisan agreement to further equip and empower Ukraine to stand on their own. It is their battle, but they don't have the necessary equipment that they need to face down a foe like Russia. They're outgunned and outmanned and outmaneuvered. And so they've been asking us for quite some time to enhance our support of them. There's obviously a direct interest that the American people have in doing so.
So he's citing a direct interest that American people have. That was his cite for his vote for the Lend-Lease Act. But after that, after this statement, months later, he would then get weak on this. Whether it was because of the flows of the Republican base's changing position on Ukraine aid, whether it was due to a personal change of heart, whether it's due to following in the guidance of Donald Trump, I don't know, but there was a change of heart. But it's very, very, very different to be a single, relatively unknown Republican and be able to vote in bills that didn't have any chance of passing anyway. The bill to ban Ukraine aid was never going to pass. The bill to stop the $300 million was not going to pass. It was just not going to. And so those votes didn't end up having an effect outside of signaling what percentage of the Republican House is against Ukraine aid. That's the only thing it ended up signaling, but it didn't really have an effect. So I was curious to see, once he moves from his position as an individual congressman to the responsibilities of uniting the entire Republican Party in a particularly divided time, when we're seeing people like, where is it? I think I have it here somewhere. Where's Chip Roy? Did anybody see that Chip Roy clip? Chip Roy going up there saying, guys, I voted for this guy thinking we weren't going to vote all this libtard nonsense, and now he's voting for that libtard nonsense. Those divides are still there. So he has to unite that party. And this is the response he gave in a quite friendly Sean Hannity interview. That means Sean Hannity was very soft on him about aid to Ukraine.
Now, we can't allow Vladimir Putin to prevail in Ukraine because I don't believe it would stop there, and it would probably encourage and empower China to perhaps make a move on Taiwan. We have these concerns. We're not going to abandon them. We want to be cooperative. We need to work together on this, but we owe it to the people to know what the plan is, where the money is going to be spent, and we need some auditing for the dollars that we've already sent over there. These are not tough questions, right? One thing that House Republicans are resolving.
So this goes on into a bunch of other topics like Israel, but I wanted to concentrate on the Ukraine area because I'm a Ukraine nerd. So from the language that he's putting forward here, this isn't full-throated, rah, rah, the spirit of Taras Shevchenko and Nestor Ivanovich Makhno shall push out the occupiers and Crimea will once again be... This isn't that. This is, I would say, a pretty milquetoast show of support, but it is, at the very least, a show of support in saying that it is in America's priorities to stop Russia in Ukraine because he believes it will spiral into other locations like Moldova, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, which are NATO countries. He's laying down a framework as to why it's within American people's interest to support Ukraine. Now, he is saying that when it comes to aiding Ukraine, we need to make sure that the financial aid is audited because there's a lot of beliefs that, beliefs online that I see of, it's all money washing, it's all corrupt, it's all being stolen. We haven't seen any evidence that aid to Ukraine, military aid from the United States, has been siphoned off in some corrupt scheme. There has been U.S. senators and congresspeople who have gone over to inspect where our weapons are being sent, and all of them, Republican and Democrat, have come back and said that they weren't able to find any discrepancies and they think that it's being relatively managed well. But I think what this might amount to is appointing an inspector general to monitor aid to Ukraine and to make sure that aid to Ukraine is getting to Ukraine. I'm not even necessarily opposed to that, but I just want to know that when he says this and they appoint an inspector general, they don't appoint somebody that's just that their purpose and their motivation to go in there is to stop Ukraine aid. Is that when they appoint somebody to do this, is that their motivation is genuinely to examine where the aid is going and make sure that it's being used for its intended purpose. There is corruption in Ukraine. There has been corruption scandals when it comes to rebuilding efforts in the Kiev area, particularly in areas like Bucha and Irpin, with government contracts handed out to shell companies, right? Like, I think that is horrible. There has been reports about humanitarian aid being resold and not reaching the locations that it was originally intended for. There's been, of course, reports of kickbacks. There was the corruption scandal when it comes to recruitment heads and people paying $3,000 to $5,000 to get out of being drafted. Zelensky responded to that by firing the heads of every single recruitment head of all the regions and replacing them with veterans, many of whom were injured in service, people who would have a motivation not to engage in corruption. So there are corruption scandals, like corruption and kickbacks, corruption when it comes to government contracts, right? Corruption when it comes to some humanitarian aid. But when people draw this image of we send over a tank, it disappears and is going to end up in the arms of Hamas. I remember that Vivek Ramaswamy video where he reposted a video of a cartel member like carrying like around a AT like an anti-tank guided missile, and he said, "Look, that's a javelin," and it wasn't a javelin. It wasn't even an American-made weapon. It was a Swedish-made weapon. He just misidentified it. That guy wants to be in control of gun control policy, by the way, for all you gun nuts out there. He misidentified and just said it went to the cartels. That is the dreams and the fantasy that I'm seeing online about American military aid to Ukraine. And that, I haven't seen evidence of that happening. I've heard reports of like a box of grenades disappearing here, like some AKs disappearing there from some Legion guys that I know, but nothing on the scale or size that people are accusing Ukraine of, and nothing specifically targeting American aid that I have heard of. That doesn't mean it's not existent. I'm just saying there has been yet to be any evidence presented of that. And until there's evidence presented of that, I'm not going to just pretend that it's all being funneled away into some money laundering scheme by people who don't know what the definition of money washing or money laundering is. But it does seem that Mike Johnson is more supportive of Ukraine as a House Speaker than he was in the last year as a representative in the House after his initial words of support after the initial February 2022 invasion. I'm hoping that he keeps to his word. As much as Russian propaganda overplayed the amount that Mike Johnson is not going to support Ukraine, or that he's not going to bring this forward for a vote, he might very well bring it forward to a vote. In fact, if he wants to get stuff through the Democrat-controlled Senate and not vetoed by the presidency, he's probably going to have some sort of vote on it. It is true that he ultimately controls it, but I don't think they can jump to that conclusion. They're jumping to that conclusion to make the Russian public think that the end of the war is right around the corner, that the Democrats and the Americans are going to break any day now. Any day now they're going to break. When that's not the message I'm getting from Mike Johnson at all. I do think due to his voting record, he's definitely not the strongest candidate to have been Speaker of the House on the issue of Ukraine. I think Tom Emmer is somebody who probably would have been stronger on Ukraine if he was elected Speaker of the House. But we can certainly not say that aid to Ukraine is doomed when he's saying statements like this on national television.